How to handle a psychotic break in meditation. Well, trigger warning. Woman lost her life, went psychotic on a Goenka retreat, as it was reported in this podcast, Untold The Retreat. Tragic situation, but Untold Podcast did not talk about trauma, and I don't think that their recommendations and suggestions were trauma aware. So let's get into it. For anyone who has had a psychotic break, may be triggering or been harmed by meditation practice, this video might be useful for you, as well as for anyone who supports people in a meditation practice or in a psychological way. So welcome, my name is Mark. I am a hypnotherapist, and I have a lot of experience with supporting people who are going through temporary psychotic breaks, and we'll talk about that in a moment. What happened was tragic. I'm speaking to one episode in particular where a woman went on a meditation retreat and lost the plot. She thought that she had destroyed the universe and that it was her fault. She could not be consoled. They locked her in a room, called her parents. She thought her parents were trying to kill her. They took her and ended up taking her to an institution. And 10 days later, she was released, but she was not the same. And she took her life some weeks later. So horrible and tragic situation. And the Untold Podcast implies that it was the Goenka organization's fault. And we'll take that apart a little bit. In the third episode of this little series, I'm going to talk about what the Goenka organization perhaps could do to support their meditators. In the second episode, I'm going to share what I would do if I was on site and this had happened. And in this episode, I want to talk about what did happen. There's a psychotic break. I'm going to refer to that as losing the plot. I'm not a therapist. I'm a hypnotherapist, and I support people with trauma. And I have worked with people for over 20 years who are having temporary psychoses, where they, in a ceremonial context, take a psychoactive medicine and have a very difficult experience. But if the container is well held and the people present are appropriate for the work, everyone comes back. And so I think the meditation organizations, even though it's very rare, they have a lot to learn from the people who are guiding people in this kind of work. So William James, he was a early psychologist in the 1890s. He wrote a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience, where he noted how similar it was. Spiritual awakenings and psychoactive experiences on psychoactive medicines can be phenomenologically very similar. But what he noted really distinct was that the people who took a medicine to experience these states, it didn't impact their life so much. Whereas people who didn't take medicines, they thought it was real. When they saw, for instance, a burning bush, it changed their life. So what we see is that in the case of someone who loses the plot, without taking medicines, just on a meditation retreat, it changed their life, much to their detriment. So that's salient of what can we do to support them to make sure they always come back. Really, in this episode, I really want to emphasize how important trauma is in this picture. The Untold Podcast did not talk about trauma. They implied that the Goenka organization, their meditation practice was too intense and it just caused this break. What it does, I can tell you with much certainty. I can't prove it, but I can tell you trauma bubbled to the surface. She had no prior known psychological issues, but that a lot of psychological issues are not known and so deeply buried. The unconscious mind's job is to bring things to the surface, and this often does manifest as psychological issues, but it's also a natural part that was accelerated by meditation. But for the most part, meditation is supportive of mental health in most ways. And I do not doubt that it would be very difficult to diagnose that buried trauma I cannot fault them for not having excluded her from their practice of meditation. So when people take psychoactive medicines, they oftentimes have a very difficult experience, and it makes perfect sense. The experience they have makes sense. It doesn't mean we're able to figure it out. It's not about figuring it out. But there's always trauma. Someone goes through a big thing, and then frequently they understand exactly what it was and where they went sideways in life to cause them to have this experience, and how this sidewaysness has impacted their whole life. You can tell from the experience someone's going through where in their life did they have the trauma. Different people's trauma will manifest in different ways, and having enough experience with that, I can tell, oh, this happened. They were around age 3 or maybe age 0, or prenatal trauma. There's a signature, and the psychological profession understands pretty well a distortion at a particular time in one's life will affect the whole rest of their life. And the quality of that distortion is like a map where you can figure out what's going wrong. So she was taken to an institution directly, and they weren't able to really help her. So to recognize this is par for the course, it wouldn't make sense to have a psychological professional on staff. We don't need this person diagnosed. What she needs is someone who knows what it's like to be there and what to do in such a situation and how to come back. And in the second and the third episodes, I'll talk about what can be done. But I just want to emphasize that it's clearly trauma. The idea that they shouldn't meditate so hard or they should get more sleep, then their practice would be less effective. It's just that there are these very rare cases, and we really want to know how to handle it. And it is trauma for sure. So I've had the experience that was very similar to hers. She felt she destroyed the universe. And this is a mental state that one can go into. And I've been there. And this comes from trauma, I believe, that happens very, very early in life, within the first year, maybe even prenatal. And diagnosing that as such is not important, but supporting it in such a way is. She thought it was real, and the more time she spent in that reality, the mind starts making up stories for why reality is this way. She was convinced she had done something very, very wrong that destroyed the universe, and that's so impossible that her unconscious mind knew it had happened but couldn't remember what it was. This is losing the plot. The support would be like, no, you're having an altered state. One, relax and breathe. No one likes being told to relax, but yes, relaxing and breathing. And knowing that it's not true. Knowing that it's an experience. Being patient, but making sure that you don't believe it's true as soon as possible is going to support dramatically in helping people recognize, like, okay, I destroyed the universe, but I am breathing comfortably and taking time, and I'm going to come back. At this point, talking to someone who has been through it, and I don't mean has read about it, I really mean has been through it. Not so many, but they're there. And the people that have this experience who need to come back, they need to be shown the way. And to realize the problem isn't what happened on the retreat. It was probably a passing thought that she really welcomed as she was taught. And that thought led all the way back into the depth of her life and opened up an energy that was so strong and powerful. She struggled to make sense of it. And unfortunately, the sense she made, I don't think it was correct. So there's a deep dive into, I believe, what happens quite commonly. I think all spiritual organizations need an understanding of trauma, especially in these super intense experiences that can be life-destroying. Again, in the next episode, I'm going to talk about what I would do to support if I was on site when someone had a psychotic break. And in the third episode, I'm going to talk about what the Goenka organization or another organization like theirs could do in such a situation. If anyone's having strong issues like this, one recommendation is check out the Cheetah House. They have some good information and resources about how to support people who find meditation and spiritual practices to be psychologically destabilizing. And if I can help in any way, be in touch with me. Thank you very much. Tune in for the next episodes and be safe out there. Bye-bye.